the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, which I sit, has just decided on Monday that its first inquiry is going to be into the network of undersea cables in and around the UK and how we can protect them.
It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. That was the message to President Putin from the newly returned US President Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform. And he warned Russia that if it does not agree to a deal to end the war in Ukraine, the US will impose further sanctions, tariffs and taxes. Well, during his election campaign, Trump said he would resolve the war within 24 hours of being sworn in as president, but he's since said he hopes to end the fighting within 6 months. This is the first indication of how he intends to approach the conflict. Russia's deputy UN ambassador, Dmitry Polyansky, has said the Kremlin would need to know what Trump wants in a deal and spoke of the question of addressing the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. It comes as the Defence Secretary John Healey told MPs the Navy's been monitoring a Russian spy ship after it was spotted in British waters and said it had earlier been loitering over UK critical undersea infrastructure. Let's talk first to Robin Niblett, Distinguished Fellow at Chatham House and the Institute's former director. He joins us tonight from Davos. Good evening, Robin.
Hi, Carol.
What do you make of these words from the newly returned US President Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's an initial salvo, should we call it, done partly to demonstrate at home that he's serious. So there's a US audience as part of this online, communication, pretty untraditional diplomacy. But at the same time, it's trying to lay out his key lines. I find it interesting that he thinks, at least, or he's implying he thinks, that Vladimir Putin would be able to treat all of this as a kind of nuclear decision, if you see what I'm saying, rather, as an economic choice that he has to make, rather than the one that is really tied into Russia's long-term interests. He's somebody who's not indicated a lot of interest in how many lives he's lost, and that's something that Trump indicated in his Truth Social post. He said, "You've lost too many lives," and he said, "I'll help your economy." I think Putin thinks his economy is doing perfectly well for the moment. So my sense would be this message is one that misreads Putin's intentions and priorities here, but it is, after all, just an opening salvo.
And the response that we've had so far from Russia, just a few words from the country's deputy UN ambassador, Dmitry Polyansky, seem to be somewhat understated. None of the bombast that we often get from President Putin or those around him to any kind of comments like this from the West.
Well, I think it's intelligently cautious on the Russian side. And, of course, what they're doing is putting their marker down, which is it's not just a matter of stopping the fighting. There's a reason why they have spent so much blood and treasure on this conflict. They want a Ukraine, from their point, ideally either not independent, part of Russia, or a vassal state like Belarus. If they can't get both of those right now, then they want absolute cast-down commitments that it'll be a neutral state, that it will never join NATO. By the way, there are additional demands that were there way back before the war started, which is that there should be withdrawal of NATO troops from East European members, states of NATO. There should be no threatening missiles nearby. He's got a huge laundry list that that Putin is going to put on the table, and is going to make this negotiation way more complex than many people anticipate.
Given all of that, and the fact that, of course, Donald Trump has a great many other issues to deal with, he's been dishing out executive orders since he returned to the White House. His overall approach, of course, is to make America great again, and that is his priority. Do you think it is going to be possible for the newly returned President Trump to actually try to broker some sort of deal to end the war in Ukraine?
Look, I think a point of encouragement would be that he's appointed former General Keith Kellogg as his negotiator. Keith Kellogg was a very trusted and loyal member of his National Security Council in his first term. Keith Kellogg has written extensively about it. He knows the situation on the ground. I think there's some intelligent people involved and will be involved in this negotiation. So I wouldn't be too concerned from that point of view. I think he can delegate this one. And in a way, this conflict is not as important to him, I don't think, to his particular agenda as some of the other items that he has on his plate at the moment.
Robin Niblett, a Distinguished Fellow at Chatham House. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol. Bye.
Well, a Royal Navy nuclear-powered submarine surfaced close to a Russian spy ship to warn the crew they were being watched as they loitered near Britain's vital undersea cables. That is what has been revealed by the Defence Secretary today. In his statement to the Commons, John Healey said he'd been forced to change the Navy's rules of engagement so that British ships and boats could get closer to the Yantar Russian research vessel and better track its activity.
A foreign vessel, Yantar, is currently in the North Sea, having passed through British waters. Let me be clear. This is a Russian spy ship used for gathering intelligence and mapping the UK's critical underwater infrastructure. Yantar entered the UK exclusive economic zone about 45 miles off the British coast on Monday. For the last 2 days, the Royal Navy has deployed HMS Somerset and HMS Tyne to monitor the vessel every minute through our waters. And I changed the Royal Navy's rules of engagement so that our warships can get closer and better track the Yantar. So far, the ship has complied with international rules of navigation. But, Mr. Speaker, this is the second time that Yantar has entered our waters in recent months. In November, the ship was also closely watched and detected loitering over UK critical undersea infrastructure.
Well, I've been speaking to Mike Martin, Liberal Democrat MP, a military expert and former army officer who's on the Defence Select Committee, and I asked him first for his reaction to Donald Trump's warning to Russia.
I think we have to put these comments in sort of a couple of weeks' worth of comments from Donald Trump on this topic. He's been progressively ratcheting up the rhetoric on Russia over Ukraine, and he's also been doing the same to Ukraine. So a couple of days ago, he said to Zelensky that, well, if you expect us to fund the war, then you should be conscripting a much larger proportion of your population than you're already conscripting. So he's putting pressure on both sides to try and force them to come to the table.
Are you reassured by the rhetoric? Because the concern has always been that Donald Trump is rather too sympathetic towards President Putin.
I think that's a really good point. I think, in this first term, we saw a huge degree of closeness between the two of them. But I am reassured. I think we have to look at the sanctions regime at the moment on Russia is the strongest it's ever been. So there is limited room for manoeuvre. I think what he said a couple of days ago is actually of more import, which is he said to Putin that if you don't come to the table and do a deal, we'll give Zelensky whatever they need to beat you. And I think that was a more powerful threat. I think Trump's doing what he normally does, right? He's a New York property developer and he throws out ideas to see how people react. And that's exactly what he said that he wants very clearly in his election campaign, that he wants to solve this war, quote unquote, solve the war. And he's going about it in his style, which is to throw out ideas and see how people react and then try and move people into that negotiating zone.
Are you concerned, though, that he may not be prepared to provide Ukraine with the sort of military and financial support that Ukraine enjoyed under Joe Biden?
I don't know what the outcome will be. And actually, I don't think Donald Trump has a pathway from here to his result in his head. As I said, I think he's just moving randomly. I think the big problem with this deal that he says he wants to get is that it will split what European nations want for Ukraine and want for European security and what America wants and thinks is a good thing for American security. That's the big problem that we have to navigate over the next 6 months.
What about this Russian spy ship that we have been told has been spotted around UK waters? John Healey, we heard there, talking tough, talking about this as another example of growing Russian aggression. How should Britain respond?
I think I was in the chamber today when the Defence Secretary made his statement to the Commons, and I'm fully in favour of the government response. It was very robust. They shadowed the Russian ship. We even surfaced a submarine very close to them to demonstrate that we had been following them. And this follows, of course, from a sort of a pattern of both Russian and Chinese vessels loitering around and or damaging undersea cables. The Royal Navy recently has actually commissioned a new vessel to do surveillance and repair of undersea cables. So at the moment, it represents a real soft underbelly. You know, we've got conventional forces in Europe. We're obviously supporting Ukraine. We have the Royal Navy, but these cables are so essential to our lives. If I said to you there's no internet and no power tomorrow, you'd suddenly realise how important these undersea cables are. And that's why I welcome the government's really robust response.
Yes, the Defence Secretary was talking about how this spy ship was loitering over UK critical undersea infrastructure. Do you think we have got sufficient protection, sufficient security in place on this issue?
No. And the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, which I sit, has just decided on Monday that its first inquiry is going to be into the network of undersea cables in and around the UK and how we can protect them. There are definitely gaps in surveillance and gaps in our ability to respond. I think the one bright bit of that picture, if you like, is the relationship that we have with our allies. And we are working both through NATO and through the JEF, which is the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is a collection of Britain and Nordic and Baltic nations. Through those two organisations, we are working really well with our allies because obviously this is a common threat. But there is certainly more that we need to do. And again, I think that Strategic Defence Review, which is coming out in a couple of months, hopefully, will also speak to that issue.
Well, let me ask you about that. I know you pressed the Prime Minister on it earlier today. Are you confident that we will get that Strategic Defence Review on time coming up this spring?
Yeah, so I asked the Prime Minister today in PMQs whether it would be on time and fully funded, because we've heard media reports that it's going to be delayed, and also Lord Robertson, before Christmas, who's the lead reviewer of the Strategic Defence Review, said that he couldn't guarantee that what they want to do with the review, the strategic outcomes, would be fully funded. I have to say the response I got from the Prime Minister was, with respect to the Prime Minister, was a bit loyally, and I wouldn't say that he committed definitely to publishing it on time and that it would be fully funded. I think expectations for defence spending are growing very rapidly. I suspect we'll be paying 3% before the end of this Parliament, and I think that the government is scrabbling to catch up and work out how to fulfil that spending gap.
Well, do you think we are going to get there? Because the Prime Minister today only talked about setting out a path to 2.5%, and this at a time when Donald Trump is saying that NATO members are going to have to spend up to 5%.
Yeah, so I think that 5% from Trump is a negotiation. I've heard other comments from very sensible members of his transition team that are talking about 3%, and that is, where for quite a long time, I've been saying that's what Britain needs to spend in order to credibly deliver with allies security in the Euro-Atlantic area.
Mike Martin, Lib Dem MP, military expert and former army officer on the Defence Select Committee, speaking to me just a little earlier. James has got in touch to say if the Russians know they can provoke a Royal Navy submarine to surface,